Hi there, my name is Victoria Pham and I'm an Australian composer, sound installation artist and sound researcher. Thank you for giving me this space and joining me today. In this particular episode of Sounds Unheard, I will be unpacking different ways of listening backwards. By listening backwards, I mean different ways that we could consider how music could be made or how music was made in the past, by looking at historical archives, by reimagining the music that could be made with historical instruments. In particular, in today's episode, thinking about the concepts of how we can bring together communities and reactivate instruments that normally we'd only encounter behind glass. I'm very pleased to kind of introduce today's project, kind of a case study into how you yourself at home can contemplate music making through historical documents and historical listening. And this project that I'm going to present today is called Resounding, and it's in fact a very long-going collaboration that is both a research sound project, a musical commissioning project, and an art practice that is in collaboration between myself and Australian filmmaker and artist James Nguyen. I invite you to listen to the following conversation that both James and I had about the project and to contemplate all things archive, all things Đông Sơn drum, and all things resounding.
Chúng tôi chân thành cảm ơn người Wurundjeri Wurrung và người Gadigal của đất nước Eora ở trên mảnh đất bị người khác lấy đi mà không phải nhường. Chúng tôi đã đến từ nơi khác hôm nay để chia sẻ những câu chuyện với tác phẩm ngày hôm nay.
We acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, as well as the where I am from, which is the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and would like to pay our respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging, as we both work, think and live on stolen, unceded land.
Yeah, so my name's James Nguyen, and I'm a visual artist and I guess a bunch of things. I make videos, I make sculpture, installations, and yeah, and my collaborator here.
Hi, my name is Victoria and I'm a composer and an artist, and I also, like James, do lots of things. So we kind of both work in a way that doesn't sit exactly neatly in a box. So this collaboration has worked well, and we're here to talk to you about our project Resounding.
Yeah, so I guess with the project of Resounding, it's to conceptually think about ideas of repatriation. So generally when people talk about repatriation, it means returning stolen objects or objects taken under, dubious circumstances during colonial times and during times of war, where people take a lot of other cultures' objects and bring them back into kind of like museums, primarily in the West. And then what is happening in contemporary times now is that a lot of these countries are demanding their objects back. For example, the Elgin marbles in Greece, a lot of First Nations people are demanding the remains of their ancestors back, and also kind of like the cultural tools and cultural materials that people want back return back to kind of like their home culture, the places where these objects initially belong.
And for us, we were really interested in researching and kind of expanding on this idea of repatriation, particularly the idea of how do we return things and the politics and challenges and questions around the return of these objects, like who owns them, who gets access to them, how do we make new knowledge with these particular objects. So for us, the project is called Resounding because we picked one specific object to kind of base this research around, and for us it was a 3,000-year-old bronze drum called the Đông Sơn drum, Because this particular object is an instrument, a musical instrument, it kind of opened up different avenues for us to think about return.
Yeah, so I guess for us, culturally, the Vietnamese diaspora, which is spread throughout the world due to the Vietnam War and French colonization and, you know, very complex histories, there's clearly an obvious kind of like home population in Vietnam, but also there's a very large dispersed population throughout the world living in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, America, Germany, all over the place. And so for us, that concept of returning an object to, say, a home population is very complex, because as diasporic people, as people dispersed everywhere, we kind of want to have access to these instruments as well, not just people who are currently living in Vietnam. So being a musical instrument, this drum kind of, like, as Victoria said, opened up new opportunities. So the idea that maybe we don't necessarily need to physically interact with these objects, but maybe just to listen to their sounds, to kind of like work with museums and go into museums and try to access their collections of these drums, and to maybe just record the sounds from their collections, and then we can spread it to our communities of musicians in Australia, throughout the world, and also in Vietnam and Southeast Asia as well. For us, that idea of reclaiming the sound became more, maybe more practical and more accessible than, you know, working through the bureaucracy of the institution and of all these museums and the politics behind that, to kind of like bring back instruments from Western museums back into Vietnam. And essentially these instruments and objects generally end up being put back into the national museums of their home countries. And so what ends up happening is that even when they're returned home, they remain silent, they remain unplayed, and they remain behind glass boxes and vitrines just as much as they would be in the West.
So a lot of this project was about us researching as a basis, but also experimenting with how we could make music and make sound to unlock the kind of essence of this particular object. And for us, and James has already mentioned that we were going to try and do like partnerships with different galleries and museums that do actually hold these instruments in their collection. But that proved a little bit challenging with the time frame that we initially had. So magically, James managed to source this exact object on the art market and purchased it. So we kind of like privately own this item, and because it's under our care, we were able to choose to make it accessible in certain ways. So with James's permission, we invited all these percussionists in Australia, so 3 percussionists, Hamish Upton, Selena Myatt and Adam Cooper-Sandbury, to actually physically experiment with the drum. And with recordings between the 3 of them, we managed to record 51 different sounds from this one single drum. And from that, we like exposed the sounds and shared them with our fellow musicians across Asia and Australia, and myself as a composer. And then we wrote music with all this electronic music, which actually you can still download all the stems from this. So we're hoping that people continue to make music and share sounds from this instrument around the world and continue to make music.
Yeah, and what was really interesting is that idea of ownership is very different to kind of like the power structures in the museum. So for us, we were constantly seeking their permission to use basically our instruments that are held in their collections. But when, as Victoria said, I bought the drum, I actually borrowed a lot of money from my parents, and got money from my auntie and uncle. And so in a way, that idea of buying and purchasing required kind of like the economic input of a collective of people. And as Victoria said, the collection of the sounds and of the musicians and percussionists we worked with, that was also a collective activity. It was like bringing together 3 different percussionists with, I guess, different perspectives and also different approaches to recording sound and generating sound. And so again, that process of collecting these sounds and digitizing these sounds was a collective experience. And as we started to put these projects online and to make them more accessible to people, and also to, I guess, commission new work from the recordings and the digital sounds that we collected, that became kind of like collective as well. We were part of an online thing called Bleed, which was an online festival during COVID, and we were able to work with musicians, like punk musicians from Vietnam, Rangap Doi, and also Bagus Mazazupa, who's a musician and composer from Indonesia. And it was this idea of collectivity in kind of like producing new music and listening to music together that became really important for us. And so we tried to kind of like break down these hierarchical structures of ownership of an object. And as we were kind of like sharing and talking about these ideas with our mentors and peers, such as Joe Sherwood Spring, we actually learnt a lot about First Nations approaches to the histories of reclaiming sound, reclaiming cultural objects and materials, including human remains. And I guess Victoria can talk about idea of rematriation as opposed to just that object repatriation that museums are very obsessed about.
Yes, so the idea we explained at the beginning about repatriation was mainly focused on physical return, like an actual physical object coming. And because we started experimenting with something that was more sonic, something that had a lot of musical potential to be shared, and to make cultural knowledge that was beyond the physical bounds of this object, through conversations with our friend Joel Spring, we came across the word rematriation, and we started unlocking all this completely different approach to returning an object or having access to an object. And that particular word, rematriation, refers to like experiencing an object through its essence. So it doesn't have to just be sound. It could be, if it's something that's olfactory, it could be its scent. It could also be its the tactility, like feeling it. But for us, and in a way, that's why the project is called Resounding. It was about entirely the sonic possibilities of a particular object, and how by playing into its sound, sharing its sound, making more music with its sound, and continuing its sonic cultural tradition away from the confines of a museum, we were kind of actually breaking the glass cabinet of a museum and making sure that we could extend the life of this particular object and continue its care. Rematriation itself is a word that comes from a lot of Indigenous studies in Australia and the Pacific, and it comes from a lot of writing. So we'll include some links if you want to learn a little bit more about the work from Dr. Vanessa Russ and also Stephen Newcomb, who have done a lot of research and writing about this particular idea that we're drawing from today.
Yeah, and so kind of like to reiterate, the idea of rematriation is looking beyond objects. It's to think about the human beings associated with that objects, that generation of culture, that idea of collectivity, that idea of sharing, and kind of like producing a form of knowledge and practice that ensures the safety of the future, the safety and the preservation, not preservation, but maybe the creation of a better, more kind of like culturally connected and culturally engaged and dynamic future with other people, and not only other musicians, but also kind of like future generations. So for us, that really breaks beyond kind of like the static encapsulation of objects within the museum. The museum is kind of like frozen in time, whereas kind of like our project is something that continues to evolve, something that continues to grow, forms new connections, and actually forms new forms of knowledge and kind of like cultural practice. And because our instrument is more than 3,000 years old, a lot of kind of like the ancient traditional practices around this instrument either has been lost or has been broken due to kind of like processes of war and colonization. But through kind of like these forms of imaginations and rematriative kind of sharing, we can imagine new cultural practices, and that keeps our sounds and our instruments present in contemporary practice, in, you know, experimental punk music that's coming out of Southeast Asia, for example. And so for us, that's kind of like the significance and goal of this project, I guess.
I think the most joyful thing has been that normally when you go into a museum, you feel like all those objects are kind of dead, like we've kind of preserved them in this inanimate state. But because the project was so much about giving life to an object, and through giving life to an object, we've been able to work with so many different people around the world, and this music coming from this one seemingly dead thing has, you know, hopefully continue to give life to more music, and more people get to hear it and play with it. So what we'll do is we'll like drop the links for all of you so you can experience the kind of sounds of the drum below, and so you can play the drum digitally, but also so you can download the sounds and continue to make music with them, and continue to be part of this journey of making new music for what used to be a silent object.
Yeah, and I guess maybe like as a bonus, that idea of repatriation and reclaiming culture, there is a particular element of nationalism that's kind of emerging from that. You know, like as these emerging countries and economies are reclaiming their kind of like cultural objects, they're basically putting them and drawing them back into kind of like nationalistic projects of defining of who they are, for example, or what a Vietnamese person is. It's like defined by these epic bronze drums. But in actual fact, the histories of these instruments are much more than that. They are not contained by post-colonial borders. They're actually contained by the people who moved and spread these instruments around. So, yeah, like during our kind of like collaborations through Bagus Mazazupa, we learned that actually the trading and the spread of the Đông Sơn drum from the northern delta of Vietnam went all the way to Indonesia and so many other places. But in Indonesia, the kings and the chiefs were so rich and wealthy that they were able to amass a whole suite of these drums, and eventually these drums turned into were the precursors for gamelan, which is like the national instrument of Indonesia. And so it really is important to kind of like acknowledge these ideas of not only post-colonial reclamations of culture, but also to reclaim that the human spirit is always interconnected, is always shared, and it goes beyond kind of like nationalistic boundaries, and also emerging forms of contemporary nationalism, which could be a little bit racist and dangerous as well.
Yeah. I almost have nothing to add beyond that. I suppose the whole project is about asking like who owns what? Does anyone actually own anything? Who gets access to it? And how do we continue to make music from the roots of those questions now? So we hope the Resounding project brings a lot of these questions to the fore and gets you in a position where the next time you go to a museum or an art gallery, you might actually think about what you can hear through the glass or beyond the glass. So yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, and thank you for giving us your time.